Hello, everyone. My name is Rafael Grohmann. I'm an assistant professor in communication at the Unisinos University, and today, and I'm coordinator of the Labor Research Lab in Brazil. And today, we will receive Jonathan Corpus Ong, associate professor in global digital media uh, at the Department of Communication at the University of Massachusetts in the United States. Welcome, Labor Research Lab, Jonathan.
Thank you so much for having me. We've been talking about collaborating for quite a while now. So great to be connected with you and your network. And yeah, excited for our conversation today.
Great, and welcome, everyone. Today, we will talk about our call for papers. Uh, Please, Jonathan, can you mute your mic, please? Okay, thanks. Uh, Today we will talk about our recently launched call for papers uh, for social media and Plus Society journal called Disinformation-for-Hire and Click Farming Around the World, Identities, Incentives, and Infrastructures. And Jonathan and I are the invited, the guest editors of this special issue. So today, Jonathan and I will present some thoughts on this issue, and then we are very excited to hear about your questions and about your doubts regarding these issues and regarding this call for papers. Jonathan, thank you very much, and the floor is yours for your first presentation.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me, Rafael. There's a little bit of a lag in my video, but I hope that you can hear me just fine. So, as Rafael said, we are co-editing a special issue for Social Media Plus Society, a media studies journal that publishes very cutting edge and very current research. Um, and Rafael and I have been talking for a while, given our shared interests on the topic of digital work in the global south. Rafael from Brazil, myself from the Philippines. Digital industries are booming industries, sunshine industries. They are seen as creating new work opportunities for many people in very economically precarious situations. Certainly, people with aspirations for social mobility are quick to embrace these forms of digital work, gig work, things like that. And of course, with the discussion of troll armies, state-sponsored propagandists, influencers for hire in the context of disinformation campaigns, election campaigns. Again, Brazil and the Philippines have a lot of resonances in terms of the trajectories of populist politics in those two countries. And so we found it important to kind of create this container, to create this space for original empirical research. And we do hope to invite folks from many different places and contexts, studying entire industries or entire practices, or even having like very specific stories, human stories of individual workers. And so that's really the aim of our call for papers. And we're going to tell you more about it in our webinar today. But Rafael wanted me to discuss and present to you some highlights from the research that I've done on this topic, and we'll do so for about the next 12, 15 minutes, right, Rafael? And so, yeah, the title of my presentation today is Disinformation for Hire, Workers in the Digital Underground. And yeah, as Rafael said, I'm at UMass Amherst. I've also been contributing to the Shorenstein Center in their current projects on the social costs and the true costs of disinformation. And again, with a very specific focus on the stories from the global south, on which we want to really center in some of our discussions. So, in a way, my entry point, and I'll just be reading. If you see me like looking at my smaller screen here, I'm just reading from my talk. Um, and the interest here is that I recognize in my work that investments in the disinformation space have been a lot of the motivation and momentum, I mean, has been on ways of fixing the content, of doing content moderation work, of having more precise definitions of hate speech or disinfo, right? And it's about ways in which we can monitor and take down the posts of various bad actors, supporting fact-checking initiatives, of which, again, there's many of these kinds of activities in global South contexts, ways of improving media freedom efforts in different kinds of contexts. And my contribution to this info studies and this set of debates around interventions has been, can we also make space for and understand the underlying political economy of this info, specifically the industry or industries that propel and produce this info, and also understand its varied and transnational workforce. So, this info studies, I would argue, can benefit from a more expansive research agenda oriented towards a deeper understanding of the social backgrounds, personal motivations, and economic incentives of the digital workers employed in this global industry. So, the special issue that Rafael and I hope to curate aims to bring together a really interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary group of scholars, not just in media studies, media anthropology, sociology of media, STS, computational social scientists, and also scholars in strategic communications and promotional marketing, right? Like critical PR studies. Would love to get your insights so that we can understand better the labor arrangements, economic incentives, and organizational hierarchies of this info production in global and transnational context. And we'd love my work and would love for many perspectives to address some of these key questions. What are the different work models in the business of this info production? What is the hierarchy of digital workers employed in global info industries? How can we regulate organizations and industries responsible for or complicit to this info production? And my work has really been to look at this info beyond just heroes versus villains narratives, right? And really understand and acknowledge complicity, that you're never really too far from troll work and ordinary modes of outsourced work arrangements organized off of gig platforms are so easily co-opted towards these different kinds of activities. And where do people draw the line? So for me, that's some of the questions that really propel and animate my work. So if we can look at slide 2, is it? So I'm gonna.
You can.
Okay, I'm gonna do that. Yes. All right. So, yeah, for those of you who might be interested to read some of the research that I've done on the topic relevant to our discussion today, here are some public reports that are available to you. Maybe we can post a link later on, but you can Google these titles, and these will be widely available. And this is really about disinfo production in the Philippines and Southeast Asia more broadly. And my work has really taken a worker-centered approach. Like, what do different workers, those in marketing firms, data analytics firms, political consultancies, how do they see their work as part of this industry or not quite this industry, right? Like, how do they justify that their work is actually pretty respectable? And also, who are the people who are trying to catch them, right? Like that cat and mouse game scenarios that we have observed over the course of the past 5 years. And the Disinfo in Southeast Elections paper was looking at comparatively 2019 elections in these three countries and what were the new trends, who are the new industries and players, but also what have platforms and governments done for good and ill in trying to catch these people. So um, one of the papers that I co-authored, and I know Rafael knows my colleague here, Jason Cabañas, who he's also the chair of the Ethnicity and Race Division at ICA, and I think ICA has been very supportive also of this call for papers of ours. I know they're going to advertise it in their mailing list. So he and I co-authored this paper, When Disinformation Studies Meets Production Studies. And in a way, it was kind of like carving out, like, so what how will the questions within this space, and it's not really owned by political science or Polcom, right? And there's many ways of framing the debate in journalism studies, but what would like a production studies or media industry studies set of questions sound like, and how might it shape the field? And for us, like, it's important to go back to like some of the original tenets of media production studies. Some would call it media industry studies. That, media work is a culture of production with organizational hierarchies, collaborative arrangements, and power struggles. So, right, like, we're very much inspired by that generation of scholars who studied film production, TV production, the work of reality TV workers and producers and editors, also like journalists, and how the journalists see themselves in relation to their editor, in relation to the media owner. And this body of work really centers the media worker and has real empathy to retell the story of media workers, not to cast them in very clear heroes versus villains kind of ways. I mean, like the work of Mark Graham, Laura Grindstaff, Vicky Mayer, Susan Caldwell, Miranda Banks have talked about the casting agents, porn producers, journalists, reality TV producers from very specific perspectives. They could be racist, classist, misogynist at times, but also operating within specific contexts, having modes of resistance, right? Like they're able to resist, to challenge the norms of the workplace. How are they able to call their work as creative, as speaking as something that expresses their deep desire? So we were thinking, like, can we kind of understand some of these workers in, so-called disinfo industries from this perspective? How do they justify this work, right? Like, how are they enrolled in this kind of work? Are they even fulfilled? How do these people sleep at night? Like, that's really the key question of our research, of my research in particular. How do they justify this kind of work to others and to themselves, right? Like, are they delusional? Like, do they think that they're doing God's work by consulting for a politician? Or is it completely amoral, this enterprise for them? So I draw from normative theory. Roger Silverstone is definitely a cornerstone of my work. Of course, he discusses complicity and collusion in media work and media participation, and I think that's super important to think about, right? Like, not just to see particular kinds of workers, the troll hunters and troll busters as the good guys versus the bad guys, right? But, in many ways, people have very close proximities to this kind of shady arrangements. Yeah, if one thinks about the whole media infrastructure as one which is about centering for-profit motives, right? Like how can it really sustain democratic exchange? And I know, Rafael, that's really a lot of what you work on as well. So this is the kind of journalistic writings and policy think tank analysis of disinformation as big business. Craig Silverman, Jane Litivenko, William Kong talked about disinformation for hire. About a year ago, this is a January 6th investigative report that they released, talking about dark PR firms. Of course, the operations of data analytics firms such as Cambridge Analytica is part of our interest as well for this special issue. There's discussions of propaganda secretaries in Nigeria, right? So some of this kind of work is folded in within government, within official government institutions and departments, but some are also outsourced, right? To give governments a sense of distance, right? Like so that they would not be personally incriminated in the kinds of this info work that they do. They will outsource it to either companies in the country or even outside of the country, right? And there's a recent study by colleagues at ASPI in Australia talking about influence for hire in the broader Asia Pacific context. So I won't talk much longer, but just to kind of like show in my own work, this is the study that I co-authored with Jason Cabañas, looking at how do clients interface with their workers, with disinfo workers, and we were very much curious about the whole hierarchy or architecture of network disinfo. Um, you know that this info is not just about one influencer or one politician, that there's a whole army of people who's part of this, and a lot of the work that I was really frustrated with, journalists in the Philippines and other kinds of contexts would do like their troll hunting or troll busting by focusing on like the fake account operator, like the low level worker. And for me, like, we need to be very clear that these low level workers report to a strategist and the consultant, those with greater power, and they are the ones we need to hold into account, really. And so, just thinking about again how economic precarity shapes a lot of this kind of economy in global south contexts, right? Like one sees like producing memes, doing um, reach and engagement or community moderation, community engagement work for politicians as just like one job, one sideline that they do. But other people are really profiting much more than these lower level workers, and that's what we need to kind of like spotlight. And so this architecture that looks at the ad strategists, the consultants at the top, the influencers in the middle, fake account operators, and also the real fans. The pro Duterte, pro Bolsonaro armies who really share these memes because they believe in it, right? And so when we use the word troll or paid troll, who are we talking about exactly? And I think it's I don't know about the Brazilian context, but yeah, like in Southeast Asian context, when we talk about trolls or buzzers, we're never really specific as to who we're talking about. And it's like, can't we just call them as ad strategists or political consultants or marketers? This is how they call themselves in the context of an interview anyway, right? So to begin that regulatory discussion, it might be more precise and specific if we get to that kind of discussion. Um, so my work has been again interested in issues of ethics. So talking about how people at the top kind of have this way of doing moral displacement or moral distancing, right? Like they see themselves um, and they use like pop culture and fictional references. I'm Olenna Tyrell from Game of Thrones, consulting and like I mean making my moves in the shadows. So and I interpret this as a way of fictionalizing and moral distancing, that it diminishes the real pernicious consequences of what they do, right? Like to describe yourself as a fictional character. There was one strategist who called herself as she's the Philippines Olivia Pope, right? Like that character from the TV show Scandal. And so some of them are pretty delusional, right? In that sense, there's a lot of like exploitation. Like younger workers are sometimes enrolled in these projects, but without real investment, without real knowledge what they are getting into, and that's what we found as well. So these are some questions that we hope to raise with many folks in our special issue, right? Like these are some of the questions that we're gonna raise and discuss, and hope that many people might be interested to engage with. How can disinfo studies also more responsibly represent the fake news producer or perpetrator behind hate speech and these kinds of organized behavior? What does that mean to actually represent or humanize or tell a human story of these perpetrators? How can disinfo studies be more expansive in terms of centering global South experiences? And beyond just platform accountability, how can we also talk about the accountability of a diverse set of digital operations? Advertising industries, promotional marketing, yeah, thinking about other ways of advancing regulatory discussions around taxation, campaign finance, influencer industries. And I know many colleagues who are doing excellent work here. Emma Bryant, Crystal Abidin has done great work in this particular space. Lee Edwards has talked about organized lying in the context of public relations. So we'd love to hear from many other folks who are working in this space. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your amazing questions and presentations, and some thoughts on your presentation. First of all, I love it, Roger Silverstone in his topics on media and communication studies, and Nick Code too, and so on. And we are very interested in this special issue on disinformation for hire and click farming around the world, with the different contexts in the north and the south. And I'm also very interested in these words to name these people and these works. Nopur Raval wrote and explained it in an amazing piece on invisibility of workers, and how we can move beyond uh, these names like ghost workers, like shadow workers, like invisible workers, from below, from the worker side. It's an exciting piece. I will share with you in Portuguese and in English too. This piece was published in ACM Interactions. So I will present some thoughts. In my presentation, it's a bit more chaotic than Jonathan. Let me 1 second. Okay. Great. Okay, can you see? Can you see, Jonathan? Okay. I will talk a little bit about the Parasite Platforms. It's like I name click farm platforms in Brazil, such as Parasite Platforms. acting as parasite with the infrastructures of social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok, regarding the metaphor of Joseph Van Dyke platforms tree. So in infrastructure and materiality point of view, these platforms act as parasite and parasite with the workers, because without workers and without these social media platforms, click farms does not click farm don't exist. And I will talk a little bit about the Brazilian on these click farms. um, I will share the totally screen. This is an infographic produced by DigiLabor Research Lab and our researchers, how it works, click farms in Brazil. First of all, customers in search of real or organic engagement on social media accounts, influencers, politicians, and companies, and many creators by followers on click farm platforms. And these real followers are workers earning less than 0.0012 dollars. So the platforms outsource to workers tasks such as following, commenting, and liking on social media accounts, mainly on Instagram, but also on YouTube and also on TikTok, also to disliking accounts, paying less than 1 cent for each action. And a worker is responsible for multiple accounts and uses more than one device for it. I know people that work with the son's device, the son's cell phones, and the husband laptop, and so on, with many fake accounts. And beside that, workers also even outsourced all of part of this their work to bots, to acting as real human bots. And furthermore, there is a parallel market for buying and selling bots and fake accounts, like informal market uh, with bots and fake accounts with prices around um, uh, 50 cents of dollar. Some click farms reappropriated this strategy too and have already created their own robots. And platforms such as Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube understand these practices as violating the terms of use and block accounts. So workers are not paid by click farms. So this is a summary of our research on click farms, but I will move and detail more some questions. The first question is that many Brazilian workers find click farm platforms on YouTube channel, saying earn extra income. And it's very interesting because there is a continuity of informal market in labor market in Brazil. These people was used to work on informal markets in many areas in Brazil, and learn to work on click farms with YouTube channel and with other influencers that sell courses that it's similar to Cheryl Soriano and also Jason Cambanis says about skill makers on platform economy, and these YouTubers acting like that. And this is an example of Brazilian click farm earn money using your own social media account. We pay you only to follow and to like and to comment using your Facebook and Instagram account. And it's interesting because the platform says the earn is very low. The money is very low, but the tasks are very easy, and so on. It's similar to other micro work and micro task platforms such as Amazon Mechanical Turks, Discourses, and so on. Other click farms say buying followers is a very common practice, and nowadays the social media are the front of all business blogger and entrepreneur and celebrity in Brazil. And please buy your likings and increase your engagement on social media. It's an example of digital market agency, a digital agency, and the people can buy 1,000 of followers per 100 of reais, mainly from human. Uh, Women people in click farms are with many value than men. And other platforms say that if you choose our platform, our army will in action, and you will receive 1 million of followers of all Brazil in a few days. Here is the table of payment regarding one of the click farm platforms in Brazil. It's like Ganhar no Insta, such as earn money on Instagram. And in 2020, um, if you follow one people on Instagram, you receive 1 cent per action, and you receive 2 cents per action if you dislike one video on YouTube. In 2020, 21, this platform changed its prices and in a half. Last year, uh, per action following on Instagram, the people are paid by 1 cent per action, and now 0.06 per action, and it's a half. So, who are the workers? And with this change of payment, some workers say this value the platform is calling us as slaves, motherfuckers. Another comment: a women and many women in these platforms saying, for me, in this pandemic, with two sons in my home, the platforms, the click farm platforms are helping me. And in this pandemic situation, in this economic situation in Brazil, it's a situation very similar to all platform labor in global south, and flexibility and opportunities regarding this work in these platforms. Other issue is regard to fake accounts, and it's very interesting because on the one hand, click farm platforms in Brazil say to workers, use only real accounts, and we have fake detections. Please don't scam us. Well, but the same platforms foresee that worker will use 2 accounts or 10 accounts, and mainly fake accounts, and sometimes the click farm platforms uh, show tips to add accounts on Instagram. The profile needs to a human photo and a minimum of 60 followers, and so on and so on. and the account have to be a Brazilian name. I don't know what is a Brazilian name. Rafael is not a Brazilian name. Jonathan can be a Brazilian name. John Lennon is a Brazilian name. Okay, what is a Brazilian name? And here are some examples from the parallel market of fake accounts. And good evening, friends. Buy good accounts on Instagram. I have clients without blocks. I have many indication, and the aesthetics of these ads, it's for WhatsApp and linked to informal market practices in Brazil. Here it's an interesting example at the right side. Um, when people say, I have fake accounts per R$1. If you are interested, call me. And the other people say, I can sell you less than 19 cents and so on. And many, it's like a fair, in a Brazilian fair and informal market. And so the workers also share with us the bots, because the workers outsourced to bots some actions. It's very interesting to, and I need to say that in our research we discovered many celebrities in Brazil. It's like a TV shows presenter. It's like soccer players and politicians and candidates, mayors, and so on. And these people pay click farm platforms because they promise the real engagement in organic engagement without bots. But the workers, as a strategy of survivor, are outsourced part of all of their work to bots and share with us these bots running all of the day, and with technological imaginaries regard um, I have high tech in my own home. And it's very different to imaginary regarding click farms in Asia, because in the left side, it's a picture circulating about click farms in Asia. In Brazil, the imaginary regarding click farm platforms are bots running in their homes. So my final thought is about remember that one of the platforms change the prices, change the payments in this year, and saying we have less tasks and so on. And we have the first strike of click farm workers in Brazil with the help of YouTube influencers. And in March or April, the click farm workers strike from 1 or 2 days, and some comments on YouTube. It's very interesting because one worker says, share some tactics. Let's delete our own profiles. Let's unfollow all of clients, and the platforms need to stop. And we workers, we have to unite, and we have to stay more and more united. And when workers say, let's stop this parasite, uh, let's stop this parasite platform. So this case in ongoing study let us know some insights for our call for papers regarding the role of the Brazilian workers in disinformation for hire and boosting political campaigns, the role of influencers on click farm workers and this digital economy, and the celebrities and soccer players and so on. And the challenges regarding regulation from below, it's like Jonathan said. I think it is. I don't know if Jonathan want to comment something.
Yeah, well, I can have, yeah. If this webinar would had we had more time, I would have, yeah, had like so many more comments. Such incredible, interesting work. I'm thinking about like the history of scams and scam cultures, right? Like the Nigerian email scams, and how we can see those as precursors to this particular moment. There's a story in what you told about young people in Brazil, and just in terms of how they had organized all of those adverts and how they entice other people as part of their, would you call it like a pyramid scheme, and do they earn from referrals and getting more people as part of their armies? I would be curious about that. Yeah, very strategic uses of visuals and using influencers as part of their recruitment strategies. So that's super interesting. I would have also questions around where you think like the respectable industries stand in relation to this. And I think for me, like there's a real important story, yeah, just in terms of like interface, and where those boundaries are between respectable and less respectable work. Do other people kind of assert themselves in, like those in air conditioned spaces of like a PR firm and like an ad agency, like, oh, this is like, would they tend to blame young people and like this as kind of like entrepreneurial, less respectable work, or do they see themselves as working in collaboration with them? And where do the politicians enter the picture, right? Like, do they interface directly with them, or are there like layers of intermediaries that, yeah, buffer them from actually engaging and talking to these entrepreneurs?
Great. Um, One question is that less respectable or more respectable is that click farm platforms sell themselves like startups. The CEOs of this click farms act like I'm a big entrepreneur, but the many of these click farm platforms are located in medium or small cities in Brazil. Uh, None of all is in São Paulo or Rio de Janeiro, but we have also PR agencies and digital agencies uh, with other aims and purposes. But I wrote recently a piece on scams with other colleagues for New Media and Society. It's in peer review. It's about the discourses on scam, because in the literature, many of the literature focused on workers are scammers, workers are full, but platforms that are parasite. It's not only the platforms acting and forcing workers to scam social media platforms and penetrating their API and so on. It's a polemic argument, but that is, I think, there are many works to do regarding the connections with click farms and disinformation for hire, and the digital, and it's like your paper with Jason about disinformation studies and production studies, and how these things connections. Well, I will share my screen again to present to the people our special issue, and then we will answer some questions. Okay. Well, people, welcome to our amazing call for papers for social media plus society. There is an open access journal. I will maximize here. Please consider submitting your abstract until October 15, and then full paper submission deadline is March of the next year. And I will read. Can you read some issues, Jonathan? Of we are especially interested in submission.
Yeah, that shed light across themes of one is like ethnographic portraits of paid trolls, meme producers, click farm workers, but also political strategists. I think we've seen like some journalistic profiles of the people at the top, like yeah, thinking of like folks involved in Cambridge Analytica, Bell Pottinger, but yeah, how can we retell stories of different kinds of workers involved in this? We're interested also in discussions of precarity, aspiration, maybe even tactics of resistance among digital workers, and as well as disinfo producers. I think Rafael's example of how the human workers behind these operations have also kind of like used some technological devices for the automation of some of the reach and engagement, for artificially boosting reach and engagement. Yeah, I never thought that could be like seen in that regard as a way of resisting, yeah, the what the clients would have preferred, right? Like, yeah, and I can think of many ways in which exploited creative workers at least see themselves as resisting their clients in various kinds of ways. Um, we're also curious about work that discuss the ethics of representing perpetrators. When should we name a perpetrator? When should we just anonymize them? Do we end up popularizing them if we keep on talking about their names and giving them a name? Um, this whole discussion also about whistleblowers, right? So there's a way of like heroizing like the whistleblower, but they can also be kind of unreliable narrators. Like they are also selling books, right? They're also kind of like trying to profit off the big disinfo industry, like the whole research industry that has also been built around this. So should we trust them? So I think that is a more meta question that we want to discuss. We're very much hoping to get work about participatory disinfo. I know it's a concept that Kate Starbird is developing. Jace Cabañas and I had also coined network disinfo, just talking about the collaboration of this kind of work. You had talked about the infrastructure, materiality, and platform trees of click farm platforms with mainstream social media. Again, talking about those interconnections of click farm platforms with legitimate social media platforms. And who is to say what is legitimate or not? Definitely curious about moral justifications of these info producers. It's something that I personally have been fascinated about. Mhm. You want
Well,
to?
yeah, I can follow. Um, Following the complicity of advertising and public relation to organized lie in the role of PR agencies and digital agencies in this organized lie, and the legitimacy, respectability, and plausible deniability, and the role of intermediaries or brokers in the disinformation industries. The mental health of workers in digital shadow economies. It's a real important question regarding the workers and the worker side, and we are very interested in this issues from below with many empirical and also theoretical perspective. The social proximities between content moderators and paid trolls in the global south, and the similarities and differences too. Regulatory loopholes in political marketing and in PR, and experiments with self-regulation and codes of ethics in digital campaigning. For example, in Brazil, we don't have a code of ethics to click farms and in manual boosts of workers. And so auto ethnographic reflections of engaged scholars about their experiences working with governments, platforms, workers, and journalists to shed light on this information shadow economies, regarding how can we move beyond this scenario? How can we change this context and so on? And so we are inviting you to send us abstracts for me in Jonathan until October 15, with an abstract articulating the issue or research question to be discussed, the methodological or critical framework, and the expected findings or conclusions. And please feel free to send us an email. We will return in a few days. Our workload is very high too, but we are strongly recommend you to send us an abstract, and I will stop share. Well, people, we'll we have one question from Mateus. Excellent. Okay. And one of the interesting themes of call is mental health of workers in digital shadow economies. Did you both think in any specific direction when you made this proposition, Jonathan?
Yeah, such an interesting question to consider, especially in the COVID moment, right? I think this was definitely like spurred by discussions of what are like new kinds of jobs that people had to pivot to in the context of COVID. Also anticipating like elections happening around the world, and how the digital will become much more central in some of those kinds of work. So did people have to compromise? Did people have to get themselves involved in like operations they would otherwise think of as beneath them? Right? Like how would they sit with that? How would they sleep at night? That kind of question. And certainly, yeah, for the mental health of workers, this is something, whether you're doing it or receiving it, whichever part of the picture that you see yourself as belonging to, right? Like the issue of digital work as always on work, right? Like it definitely weighs heavily on you. So those are some of the themes, but we're definitely open to receive different angles and approaches to that question.
Yeah, and I think that I work in fair work project, and we set fair work principles on platforms, and we don't have yet articles relating fair work principles and click farms or disinformation industry, and how we have many articles on mental health of workers in Deliveroo and Uber and so on, and also content moderators with the amazing book and research of Sarah Roberts, but we have less research of mental health of disinfo producers, and click farm workers. And I think that is an amazing idea. Well, do you have questions, doubts? Are you excited to write in an abstract to us? 2 seconds to you thinking about. Well, both Jonathan and I are open to your proposals and your submissions, and feel free to email us and read our call for papers. I will pass one more time of social media and plus society, edited by Zizi Papacharisi. We are very thankful to her too. John?
Yeah, so we're super excited. I know some folks have already reached out to us from different kinds of methodological and disciplinary kind of backgrounds. So some had approached us, those with more ethnographic expertise as well as computational expertise, and we're definitely open to engaging, diverse kinds of submissions and methodologies. So the good thing about social media society and Zizi's journal is that it's open access, and they're going to also waive the article processing fee. So otherwise, if you want to submit to their excellent journal, you would have to pay a fee. So for this special issue, they're going to waive that for any accepted papers. And at the same time, there is flexibility in terms of how you want to write it, in terms of also the number of submissions that they're willing to accept, that we're willing to consider. So there is flexibility here. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and we're happy to help and clarify. And we definitely want to hear a lot of from scholars in the global south, and to talk about how this implicates them. And I think that this is something that we've also observed with how this debate has played out in disinfo studies, that, like the global north journalists, they're kind of just getting in on this now. Rafael and I have been talking about this for a while. And many of us know that the political systems in countries in the global south have really institutionalized these kinds of arrangements, and it's got a lot to do with like those histories of those political systems, which are not very clear cut in terms of ideological differences, and therefore the personality politics, branding approaches, also paying out voters, right, like through old school means of just vote buying, right? That's been part of the old school artillery, and therefore digital weapons are just like a new addition to like a very large bag of tricks that political elites have been using in our countries.
Great. In Brazil, people talk about Bolsonaro have an office of hate. But in Rio, there is a factory floor of hate, and army and of hate here in with Bolsonaro, or with Duterte, or with other politicians. Well, thank you very much, Jonathan, and all of you for having us today. We are looking forward to read your proposals. Thank you, Jonathan. Bye bye. A good summer to you. Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.